Hello friends and welcome back to Haas of Props. Today I'm going to show you how to assemble a Stormtrooper helmet out of multiple 3D printed pieces and how to achieve a paint job that is very similar to the helmet seen in A New Hope. Let's get started. Once some of the pieces were finished printing, I started to smooth off some of the print lines with a 220 grit pad on my hand sander. By sanding the pieces before we apply the glazing and spot putty, it will help us achieve a really smooth finish that will resemble the actual screen-used helmets. This video demonstrates what I have found to be the most effective and efficient process when smoothing 3D prints and when working with assembling and smoothing multi-piece prints. While I sand, I would appreciate it if you would click the subscribe button if you haven't already, and go ahead and click the notification bell so you can get notifications when a project is released. You can see here how just the little bit of sanding with the hand sander can remove a lot of the print lines very quickly. When I'm finished with the hand sander, I take some 180 grit and sand over the pieces again. This will get rid of any lines that were being a little stubborn with the hand sander. If you want, you could change out the pad on the hand sander if you have different grits, but I only have the 220 pads, so it looks like the rest of the sanding I'll need to do by hand. When I'm finished with the 180, I'll take some 400 grit and just smooth off the pieces. The 180 will leave the pieces feeling a little scratched, but the 400 will smooth it where you can't feel the lines. Once the pieces are sanded, they can be assembled. I use two glues for this. The first is some E6000. Squeeze some of this onto the edges, but leave some gaps in the glue, because here we can place some CA glue. E6000 has a more flexible bond when dry, so be sure to only use the CA in a few spots and have the majority of your glue coverage be the E6000. Then the piece can be put into place, positioned, and aligned. Make sure your seams are flush and everything is in its correct spot. Then you can take some zip kicker and squeeze a couple of drops on the spots where the CA glue is, and this will set the glue almost instantly, holding the piece in place while the E6000 continues to dry. Next, we're going to take some of this glazing and spot putty and fill in the seams across the helmet. To do this, I use a palette knife, but some people use their fingers. If you use your fingers, be sure to wear gloves because this stuff is toxic. Apply a generous amount to the seam because the putty does shrink as it dries and your seam can become invisible again if you apply too thin. When the putty has dried, I smooth it with some 400 grit sandpaper. This process can be messy, so make sure you wear a dust mask and work in a well-ventilated area. While you're sanding, try to keep your sandpaper flat on the surface. If you lift and angle it too much, you could potentially dig into the seam and remove too much putty. If you do this, it's not the end of the world. Just apply more putty and repeat the sanding. With the seams now smooth, I took some of the putty and thinned it with a little acetone, and then took an old paintbrush and applied this across the surface of the helmet. This will help fill in any print line areas that the sandpaper wasn't able to get completely smooth. If you have an old airbrush, you could also spray the mixture onto the helmet. The airbrush will help you avoid brush marks and give you a more even coverage. But if you don't have one, don't worry. The brush will work just fine and any brush marks will be taken care of as soon as the helmet's dry. When you've gotten the helmet completely covered and it's dry, take some 400 grit sandpaper and sand over the putty. When you finish sanding, wipe the helmet down with a cloth to remove the fine dust that's left behind. Then we want to spray the helmet with a 2-in-1 filler and sandable primer. For a project like this, I suggest about 3 even coats. Let each coat completely dry before you spray the next. That way you can avoid runs and drips with each layer. When the 2-in-1 is dried, take your 400 grit and sand the entire surface. You don't want to sand so hard that you remove it all, just enough that you make the surface feel smooth. Make sure you get in all the curves and edges, or you may end up with an uneven surface that will really be visible when you paint the helmet white. Next, I wet a spot on the helmet with a little water and then take some 1000 grit sandpaper and sand in a circular motion. The wet sanding will help us achieve a shiny, smooth, glass-like surface, and repeat this process across the entire helmet and you will be left with a super smooth helmet. Next, the helmet can be based with a glossy white spray paint. Depending on the paint you use will determine how many coats it will take to get complete even coverage. Your best bet is a paint and primer combo. It's a little thicker and you will get a better result. When the white is dry, I tape off everything and leave the spots that are meant to be gray exposed. For the gray, I'm using this medium gray primer. It is a primer, but it is the perfect shade of gray for this project, and it should only take one even coat to cover the small square patches. And when the gray is dry, the helmet can be retaped to expose the areas that need to be black. Then these areas can be sprayed with a glossy black paint. It took me about 2 coats to get an even, shiny paint job. When everything's dry, we can begin to add the hand-painted elements. As you can see in this photograph of one of the original helmets, the gray areas have lines painted in them that were clearly added by hand. To do this, I'm using a 00 brush with some black acrylic and just referencing the photos to make sure I get the placement and the line count correct. Then I take some silver and paint the inner pieces of the induction filters. I'm doing this by hand since they're so small, but you could tape them off and spray them if you wanted. For the striping on the side, I made a stencil out of masking tape and pounced some medium blue on the openings. When working with a stencil like this, it's best to keep your brush perpendicular to the surface. That way the brush's bristles are less likely to slide under the stencil edges. Then the stencil can be peeled away and used on the other side. Some variation in the paint surface is a good thing because then it will resemble the screen-used helmets even more. Once all the painting is complete, I spray the helmet with this gloss crystal clear coat. It will keep the shine and protect the paint from being damaged. I wanted to avoid a chance of drips or runs happening, so I only used 1 coat. You could use more if you wanted, just make sure to keep them thin and light. To make the goggles, I'm using pieces from the medical face shield I used when I made my Mandalorian helmet. Peel away the protective coverings and place the plastic on a surface that you can apply heat to, and the piece will slightly overhang. The shield appears to be black, but it's actually a very dark green, so when it's in place in the helmet, people on the outside would never guess that it's green, but while you're wearing it, everything's going to have a green hue to it. Then take a heat gun and heat the plastic until you notice that the edges are starting to soften and droop. Then carefully place the plastic inside the helmet, covering one of the eye openings. Apply pressure and press it into place and hold it with a piece of wood. Hold it in place until the shield cools down and the plastic will hold the shape of the helmet. Next, apply a bead of CA glue to the inside of the helmet and place the eyepiece onto the glue and let the glue dry. The last step is to cover the holes in the breathing vent. To do this, I'm going to glue a piece of black fabric on the inside of the helmet. This way air can still get through and you can still breathe, but no one on the outside can see inside the helmet. And there you have it, a fully wearable Stormtrooper helmet from the original Star Wars film, A New Hope. The helmet is fully wearable, and as you can see, it fits my enormous head easily. So if you needed to add any padding to it to make it fit more comfortably, there's plenty of room for that. If you would like to make one of these for yourself, you can find a link to the files in the below description. And please, give this video a thumbs up, share it with friends and family, and subscribe to Haas of Props. And remember, if you are building any of my builds or using any of my templates, feel free and tag me at Haas of Props on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, because I would really like to see your fantastic work. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.